They say if you work hard enough, push long enough, and sacrifice deep enough, life eventually rewards you. That was my gospel for nearly 20 years. Grind now, rest later. Win at all costs, and for a while I did. Creative director at one of LA's top agencies by 38, a skyline apartment, a bank account that rarely dipped, a calendar packed with launch parties, campaign shoots, red carpets. From the outside, I was living the dream, but inside, I was barely breathing. There were mornings I'd wake up with a pit in my chest, not from sadness, not from fear, but from emptiness. Like I'd built a cathedral made of glass, beautiful, impressive, and one wrong move from shattering. I didn't talk about it. Who would I tell my clients, my team, my friends who thought I had it all? No, I just kept moving, kept chasing. The night it hit me was a Tuesday, midweek, midlife, middle of everything. We just pitched a global campaign to a streaming giant, 20 people in the room, neon lighting, cold water, and glass bottles. I presented with the usual fire. The head nods came, the client smiled. It was a win. But walking out, I felt nothing. No high, no satisfaction, just an inner silence, loud and strange. I took the elevator down alone, stared at the brushed steel doors, and whispered to myself, why does winning feel so much like losing? Later that night, I climbed into the backseat of an Uber. Downtown lights flickered against the windows. The driver said nothing. Neither did I. Somewhere along the 10 freeway, I caught my reflection in the window, and I didn't recognize the man looking back. He looked tired, not just physically, existentially, like a man who had everything except peace. And for the first time in a long time, I asked myself a question I didn't have an answer to. What if the chase is the problem? That one thought became a whisper. Boy, a whisper I couldn't ignore. Over the next few days, I stopped checking emails as often. I let calls go to voicemail. I canceled meetings without excuse. Then came the moment. It was small, stupid. Even I was about to click send on an email that would lock in a 6-figure performance bonus. But my hand just hovered. Something inside me said no. Not because I didn't want the money, but because I couldn't keep pretending that this was the prize. So I closed the draft, deleted it, and for a brief moment I felt weightless, like I just stepped off the hamster wheel, mid-spin. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat on my balcony. LA spread out like a glittering lie below me. I thought about every time I believed peace would come after the next promotion, after the next relationship, after the next accomplishment, always after, never now. A phrase popped into my head. Something I'd heard years ago in passing, dismissed at the time as spiritual fluff. By needing nothing, you attract everything. Back then, I thought it was nonsense. Now, I wasn't so sure. What if needing nothing isn't about apathy, but about alignment? What if surrender isn't weakness, but strength? What if letting go is the only way to hold on to yourself? The next morning, I made the call. I told my assistant to block out 2 weeks. No calls, no projects, no PR. She was stunned, but I was calm. I had no idea where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay where I was. Later that day, a friend texted me about a retreat center in the Mojave Desert. Minimalist, off-grid, no Wi-Fi, no social media, no healing packages, just space, silence, stillness. I booked it without reading the rest. I didn't tell anyone, not my colleagues, not my family, not even my therapist. It felt too personal, too raw, like a question I needed to answer alone. 2 days later, I packed a duffel bag, turned off my phone, and drove east. The city faded behind me. Billboards gave way to sand. The skyline became wide open sky. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was heading towards something, instead of running from something else. But I didn't know yet what that something was. All I knew was this. I was tired of needing so much, of needing to be seen, of needing to prove myself, of needing success to feel worthy. Somewhere between Joshua Tree and the retreat gates, a thought landed quietly. What if everything I've been chasing is already inside me? I didn't know how to live that way, not yet, but something deep inside whispered, it's time to find out. The Mojave doesn't greet you with warmth. It doesn't care who you are or why you came. It just is vast, silent, unapologetically still. I arrived at the retreat under a sky so wide it made my chest ache. The road behind me was a line of dust. Ahead, nothing but low adobe buildings, cactus shadows, and a kind of quiet I didn't know how to hold. No check-in desk, no welcome drink, just a handwritten sign near the entrance. Stillness is your teacher. A man met me at the path, beard like desert brush, skin leathered by sun. He introduced himself with a simple nod. Raphael. He didn't ask why I came, didn't ask what I was hoping to find. He just handed me a metal water bottle and said, "Your body will resist first, then your mind. Let both happen." Then he walked off like a wind gust, vanishing before I could respond. The first few days felt like detox. No phone, no clock, no conversations unless necessary. Meals were quiet, mornings were cold, nights were colder. I kept thinking, this is temporary. Just hold on till the epiphany. But nothing came, no breakthrough, no inner peace, just stillness and the grinding sound of my own thoughts. On the fourth day I cracked, it was noon. The sun was vicious. I decided to hike one of the marked trails behind the retreat just to do something. Anything. The map was vague, but I didn't care. I stuffed a few protein bars in my bag, filled the water bottle, and walked into the heat. The trail started simple, sandy, quiet, boring. But after an hour, the terrain changed. Hills rose, shadows disappeared. The wind died, and I was alone. My mind, of course, filled the silence. You should have told someone. You're going to get lost. This was a mistake, but I kept walking. Step after dry, dusty step, and that's when I saw it. A shimmer in the distance. Green-blue moving. An oasis. I laughed out loud. It looked ridiculous, like something out of a movie. Palm trees, water shade? Was it real? I didn't care. My body moved without thinking, pushing faster, harder toward it, breathing ragged, throat dry, eyes burning. But with every step, the oasis drifted farther away. Like it was mocking me, I stumbled, fell to one knee, got back up, kept going. Just a little farther, I told myself. Just over that ridge, then you'll find relief. I don't know how long I pushed, minutes, hours. All I remember is collapsing face first into the sand. Mouth open, skin burning, muscles cramping. No water, no shade, no relief, only heat, regret, and the cruel silence of the desert. At some point, I must have blacked out. When I opened my eyes, the sun had shifted. The light was softer. The wind had returned, and above me, blocking the sun, stood Raphael. He didn't look angry or worried, just still. He knelt beside me, handed me the water bottle. Didn't say a word as I drank. Only after I finished did he finally speak. You ran toward a ghost. I wanted to snap back. Tell him it looked real, that I was desperate, that I needed to believe something was waiting for me, but I didn't. Because deep down, I knew he was right. I wasn't chasing water. I was chasing relief, control, escape. And the harder I chased, the farther peace ran. Raphael sat down beside me. He looked out over the endless sand and said, "Stillness isn't something you find out there. It's what's left when you stop chasing." We sat in the silence for a long time. The wind shifted again. A hawk circled high above. And I realized this was the first time in days I hadn't felt like running. Not from pain, not from silence, not even from myself. Back at the retreat, I slept for 10 hours straight. No dreams, no restlessness, just emptiness. But it wasn't hollow. It was spacious. Like something old had finally moved out of me and something quiet was preparing to move in. The next morning, Raphael met me in the cactus garden. He handed me a small rake and pointed to the sand beds. Clear a path, that was it. No explanation, no task list, no goal. Just that, clear a path. I worked in silence, moved slowly, felt each grain shift beneath my fingers. There was no prize at the end, no audience, no outcome. And strangely, for the first time, I didn't need one. There was another guest at the retreat. Leah, maybe mid-30s, soft eyes always journaling near the rocks. We didn't speak much at first. The rules discouraged chatter. But one evening as we watched the sunset paint the desert red, she looked at me and said, "I used to think healing meant fixing. Now I think it just means stopping." She smiled, closed her notebook and walked away. And I sat there stunned by how simple it all suddenly seemed. I came to the desert looking for answers, for release, for something to replace the burnout I'd been dragging like a shadow. But what I found was nothing. And in that nothingness, something began to shift. Not a breakthrough, not a spiritual high, just the subtle, quiet understanding that stillness doesn't come after the chase ends. Stillness begins when we choose to stop running. Stillness isn't as peaceful as it sounds. At first it's awkward, then agitating, and eventually it becomes something else entirely. After the hike, I didn't try to figure things out anymore. I didn't journal, I didn't ask questions, I didn't seek meaning. I just sat on stone benches, on dry earth, in shaded corners of the cactus garden. I watched ants. I listened to the wind. I stared at the sky until my eyes burned and blinked myself back into the moment. For the first time in years, I wasn't producing anything. No decks, no ideas, no plans. I wasn't working on myself. I wasn't even healing. I was just there, breathing, blinking, watching. And strangely, it started to feel okay. There was a moment on the 6th day I'll never forget. Late morning. The sun was soft. I was sitting near the sculpture garden, staring at a wind spinner twisting in slow circles. And for just a second, my mind went completely silent. Not because I forced it, not because I was meditating. It just stopped. The thoughts, the judgments, the stories, all of it faded like background static. Turning off, I didn't feel happy or sad, just empty in the most beautiful way. I realized something then. This was the first time I had ever truly done nothing. Not procrastination, not rest disguised as distraction. Real nothing. And in that space, something old fell away. Later that afternoon, Raphael found me sweeping the outer walkway. He stood beside me quietly watching. Then he said, "You're beginning to soften." I didn't understand at first. I looked down at my hands. Same hands, but he wasn't talking about muscles. He meant the grip I'd had on everything. Control, identity, results, ego. I hadn't let go all at once, but piece by piece, something in me was loosening. That night, I found an old watch in my bag, designer heavy. The kind of item that screams importance. I used to wear it like armor proof of status, of structure, of time well managed. Now it felt foreign. Like a relic from a life I wasn't planning to return to. I held it in my palm for a long time. Then I walked to the edge of the dunes and threw it deep into the sand, not in anger, not to make a statement, just to let it go. It wasn't about the object, it was about the weight. Every day before this one had been measured by hours and output, but now I had no agenda, no deadlines, no metric of value. And for the first time, I wasn't anxious about it. In the days that followed, something new began to take shape. Not clarity, not purpose, but space. I started to notice things I never had the time or patience to see before. The way light shifted through the mesquite trees, the rhythm of Leah's footsteps on the gravel, the sound of water dripping from the old copper pipe behind the outdoor shower. Tiny, quiet truths that had always been there. I'd just been moving too fast to notice. One afternoon, Leah and I sat together in silence beneath the shade. She looked over and said, "Do you ever feel like your mind's always shouting, even when no one's talking?" I nodded. She smiled. "Stillness isn't the absence of noise," she said. "It's the space where the noise finally dies down." Then she got up and walked away, leaving me alone with that thought, and I let it sink in. Back in the garden, Raphael gave me another rake. This time, he didn't say anything, just pointed toward the stones. I started tracing lines, circles, spirals. I didn't know what I was making, and for the first time, it didn't matter. I wasn't creating for approval. I wasn't performing. I was simply moving one breath, one drag of the rake, one footstep at a time, and it felt enough. That evening, something shifted again. I sat outside facing west, watching the sky shift into deep orange. The silence around me wasn't heavy anymore. It felt alive, like the desert itself was breathing with me. And in that breath, I heard something new. You don't have to earn your right to be still. That line didn't come from a book or a mentor. It came from somewhere deeper. Maybe from the part of me I'd ignored for years, the part that didn't care about promotions, productivity, or prestige. The part that just wanted to be. There's a truth the Stoics knew well. Peace doesn't come from the removal of pain or the addition of pleasure. It comes from clarity, from seeing things as they are, not as we wish them to be. And in that desert stillness, I began to see myself. Not the image I sold, not the version I projected. Just me, unpolished, undistracted, undone. I didn't feel healed. I wasn't suddenly full of answers, but I wasn't chasing anymore. I wasn't fixing, I wasn't proving, I was resting inside something deeper than ambition. A quiet I'd spent most of my life running from, now holding me like a friend. And as I watched the wind move through the cactus arms, I finally understood. Stillness isn't a reward you earn. It's a state you return to once you remember. You never had to leave. There's a silence you grow used to out here, not just the kind where birds stop singing or wind dies down, but the kind inside you. The silence after the questions stop, the stillness beneath the noise. That's what started happening to me. I'd sit for hours now, not to escape my thoughts, but because they didn't control me anymore. They came and went like weather. I just watched them pass. Stillness had become more than a moment. It was turning into a place I could live. One morning, Raphael asked me to meet him by the tank. Not the water tank, the sensory deprivation one. I'd seen it before off to the side of the main house, in an old fiberglass pod with a hatch door and mineral-heavy water inside. I'd avoided it. I told myself I didn't need it, but something about the way Raphael looked at me that morning, I knew it was time. He didn't give a long speech, just handed me a towel, nodded toward the tank and said, "The void isn't punishment, it's preparation." Then he walked away. Inside the tank, it was warm. The water cradled my body perfectly, salt-heavy, silent. When the lid closed, I was sealed in total darkness. No sound, no light, just breath and heartbeat. At first, I counted my exhales. Then I tried to remember every city I'd worked in. Then I gave up trying altogether. That's when the visions came. They weren't dreams. They were memories sliced and rearranged. I saw my father's face the night he left. The slam of the front door. My mother pretending nothing happened. I saw myself at 17 pushing to win a scholarship, believing that achievement was the only way out. I saw the apartment in LA filled with things I once thought meant I'd made it. I saw the watch I threw into the sand. All of it drifted through me like smoke. But I didn't resist this time. I didn't try to change what I saw. I didn't shame myself. I didn't justify anything. I just watched. And somewhere in that floating dark, I heard a voice, not out loud, but deep inside. You don't have to carry all of this. No booming revelation, no grand awakening, just an invitation to finally set it all down. When I came out of the tank, the sun had shifted again. I sat wrapped in a towel, feeling lightheaded but clear. Raphael was sitting nearby, sipping tea like he'd been waiting. Without looking at me, he said, "Now you understand the void." I nodded slowly. "It's not empty," I whispered. He turned, smiled softly. "No, it's the beginning of everything." That night we sat by the fire pit. Me, Raphael, Leah, and one or two others. The stars burned clean above us. Raphael looked older than I'd ever seen him. His face was tired but peaceful. And then in the same way he always spoke, calm, unforced, he said, "I'm not staying here much longer." We all paused, unsure what he meant. He smiled again, slower this time. "Not the retreat life." For a moment, nobody said anything. I looked at Leah. Her hand clenched the edge of her chair. Raphael continued, "I've known for a while. The doctors gave me time. I came here to give myself peace." He glanced up at the stars to practice letting go. Before life made me do it. My throat tightened. This man who had said so little yet taught me so much was preparing for the final surrender. Not out of fear, not in desperation, but in acceptance. A true Stoic to the end. Later, after the others left, I stayed behind Raphael and I sat in silence for a long time. Then I asked him, "Aren't you scared?" He shook his head gently. "Scared of what?" I shrugged. "Of what comes after. Or what you're leaving behind." He smiled again like he knew a secret I wasn't ready to hear. "You only fear losing things when you still think they belong to you." That hit hard. Not in a dramatic way, but in that slow, grounded way the truth tends to hit you when you're finally ready to hear it. Raphael stood, placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "You've been learning how to let go of success, control, ego. But letting go of life, that's the final test." He paused, eyes locked with mine, and it's the same answer every time: surrender. After he left, I sat alone. The fire was down to embers. The desert air was sharp and clear, and I thought about everything I was still clinging to. The labels, the fears, even the image of who I thought I should be. And I realized none of it belonged to me. Not really, I was just holding it all too tightly to notice. The void wasn't a place to fall into. It was a space to open into. And in that space, when you stop filling it with fear or grasping, there's room for peace to finally arrive. Not as a reward, but as a return. In the coming days, I spoke less and listened more. Raphael and I shared fewer words, but deeper silences. Leah began drawing again, her lines softer, freer. And I walked the garden each morning, not to reach anywhere, but simply to be where I already was. I no longer needed the tank or the questions or the rituals, because I had entered the void, and instead of being consumed by it, I was becoming part of it. Still calm, spacious, just like the desert. And now, whenever the fear crept in, the fear of loss, of uncertainty, of death, I reminded myself of Raphael's words: "You only fear losing what you still believe is yours." Coming back felt like re-entering orbit. The city hadn't changed, same rush, same lights, same noise, but I had. There was no fanfare waiting for me. No spiritual applause for the inner work I'd done in the desert, just my old apartment, quiet and untouched, like a paused scene waiting to resume. I walked through each room slowly. Everything was still where I'd left it: the espresso machine, the stacked notebooks, the unopened packages by the door. But they felt like props now, reminders of a story I no longer needed to perform. The silence in my living room wasn't empty anymore. It was familiar. Like the stillness I'd come to trust. Emails blinked on my laptop. Deadlines, requests, invitations. Old triggers once tied to identity and urgency. I read them all, without reaction. No tension in my chest, no racing mind. Then I clicked archive. All not to rebel, not to make a statement, just because none of it felt necessary. Later that week, my agency called. They wanted me back, offered a new role. Bigger team, more money, a performance bonus tied to a high-profile tech campaign. Old me would have leapt, but this version of me paused. I asked for a day to think. Then I sat at my kitchen table, made tea, and wrote out a question I'd never asked before. What do I want to move with, not chase after? That changed everything. I didn't want chaos anymore. I didn't want urgency masquerading as importance. I wanted alignment. So the next morning, I called my boss and told her the truth. I'm not coming back full-time, but I'll consult. On one condition: silence. Then she asked, "What's the condition?" I smiled. "I'll work in silence. No brainstorm meetings, no pitch decks, just outcomes." Quietly. She paused, then laughed. "You mean like a Stoic freelancer? Something like that?" And to my surprise, she agreed. Turns out people are hungry for clarity, for the kind of presence that doesn't demand the room, but anchors it. I became exactly what I once couldn't understand: a quiet force. Not because I stopped caring, but because I stopped needing to control how things unfolded. I restructured my days. No alarms, no time-block schedules. I'd wake early, stretch, make tea. Then I'd sit with an old notebook and let the work come to me. Some days I wrote strategy briefs. Other days nothing came, and I let that be okay. It wasn't laziness. It was alignment, a rhythm. I didn't force, just like the wind that moved the cactus arms back at the retreat. I remember one day, maybe 3 weeks after coming home, an email came in from a major luxury brand. They wanted me to lead a campaign launch. Big money, big scope, My heart didn't race. My ego didn't jump. Instead, I sat with it for a while. Then I replied, "Thank you. I'm not the right fit anymore." I didn't explain why. I just didn't feel the need to fill space that wasn't mine anymore. I found joy in the small things again. Cooking for myself, sitting on my balcony at dusk, watching the wind move through city trees instead of desert ones. Life wasn't louder, but it was fuller. Not because I had more, but because I wanted less. Leah visited LA in early spring. She had an art show near Echo Park, mixed media pieces about grief and growth. We met at a quiet cafe, no agenda, just coffee and calm. She looked at me and said, "You're different." Lighter, I smiled. "So are you." She tilted her head, then laughed softly. I think we both stopped chasing ghosts. That night, I walked her back to her Airbnb. We didn't say much, but as we reached the front steps, she stopped and turned to me. "What if this is it?" she asked. "What?" "This peace, not a phase, not something to fix. Just what life feels like when you stop running." I nodded. Then maybe that's all I ever needed. The next morning, I opened my journal. I hadn't written in weeks, not because I was avoiding it, but because I hadn't needed to process anything. But now something stirred. So I wrote, "I didn't win. I didn't conquer anything. I surrendered, and somehow that gave me my life back." That's when I realized I hadn't gone to the desert to find answers. I went to unlearn the questions, to stop clawing at what I thought I needed, to remember what it feels like to act without forcing. The Stoics call it apatheia, a kind of serene detachment, but it's not apathy. It's clarity. It's knowing what's yours to carry and what never was. It's doing what needs to be done without letting it define who you are. Somewhere along the way, I stopped reacting and started responding. Stopped reaching and started receiving. Stopped needing and started noticing. I move like water now, around obstacles, through open spaces, toward nothing yet arriving where I was supposed to be. Not because I planned it, but because I trusted the flow of life to carry me there. It's funny how full life feels. When you stop trying to fill it, I didn't go back to the desert expecting to stay. But one visit became two. Then quietly it became something more. Now I live about an hour east of Joshua Tree, not deep in the retreat center, but close enough to feel its quiet hum. I split my time between stillness and service. Some mornings I consult with creative teams. Others I walk with guests on their first day here. No phones, no plans, just open space. And in those walks, I see the look I once carried. Eyes scanning for something to fix. A heart still chasing peace like it's a thing to win. I don't try to give answers anymore. I've learned that people don't come here for advice. They come here to remember. And remembering can't be rushed, so I just walk beside them. Let silence do the talking. There's one trail I favor, a winding path between boulders and creosote brush. The same path where Raphael once led me years ago after the mirage. Back when I thought letting go was defeat. Now I see it differently. Surrender isn't weakness, it's wisdom. It's trust, and trust isn't passive. It's the deepest kind of strength. People ask me if I miss my old life. The skyline, the spotlight, the buzz. Sometimes I do, but not in the way they expect. I miss who I wasn't. That version of me was loud but hollow. Sharp but scattered, always reaching, never arriving. Now I don't reach, I just open, not for everything, just for what fits, what flows, what feels aligned with the deeper current running through life. I don't teach productivity anymore. I teach pauses. I don't teach motivation. I teach stillness. And the strangest thing, that's when the breakthroughs come, not in the striving, but in the space between. Leah and I stayed in touch. Her art went deeper, quieter, like her grief had finally found a canvas soft enough to rest on. We don't talk every day, but when we do, it's simple. Sometimes we sit in silence over coffee, sometimes we exchange a single line. Once she texted me, "By not needing you, I feel closer to you," and I understood exactly what she meant. That's the paradox, isn't it? The less you grasp, the more life shows up. The less you demand, the more it offers. When you stop chasing the word DM, it finds you and it brings with it the very things you thought you had to earn. Peace, clarity, connection. Not because you forced it, but because you stopped resisting it. We had a new guest last month. Corporate lawyer, smart, sharp edges. On his first day, I found him pacing near the rocks. He looked at me flustered and said, "So what am I supposed to do while I'm here?" I just smiled. "Nothing." He blinked. "Nothing." I nodded. He stared at me like I'd handed him a riddle he couldn't solve. And in a way I had. A week later, I watched him sit still for the first time. Just sit. No fidgeting, no phone, no list in his head. Just breath. That's when I knew he'd finally met the silence. Instead of fighting it, that's when the work began. It always starts that way. Not with a breakthrough, not with tears or epiphanies, but with a long, quiet moment where you stop chasing and simply arrive. And in that moment, something shifts. You stop looking for the world to fill you because you realize you already are. There's a quote from Marcus Aurelius I carry with me now. "Look within. Within is the fountain of good." I used to read it like a line from a book. Now I feel it as a truth in my bones. The fountain isn't outside, not in success, not in others, not in applause. It's in the quiet part of you that knows how to be before anyone told you who to be. I live simply. Now, morning walks, soft meals, clear space, no clutter on my shelves, no noise in my calendar, and yet I feel more abundance than I ever did with the life I left behind. Because abundance was never the stuff, it was the space. And if there's one thing I've learned through it all, from the collapse in the desert, to the silence of the tank, to Raphael's final goodbye, it's this: you don't find peace by adding more, you find it by needing less. People come and go, seasons shift. Even silence changes its tone with time, but this truth remains. By needing nothing, you attract everything. Not because the world rewards you, but because you finally step out of your own way and let the world arrive as it always intended. So if you're listening to this, if you're holding tight to something, an outcome, a person, a version of yourself, ask gently, what if I let it go? What might arrive in its place? You don't have to force the answer. You don't even have to seek it. Just listen. Let the stillness speak. Let the void open and trust that whatever finds you there was never missing at all.